Darling, sit here with me. Let me tell you something I never thought I could share with anyone. My name is Maggie, and today you see me with white hair and trembling hands. But there was a time when I was a young woman full of dreams. I lived in the hustle and bustle of New York City in the 1960s, when everything seemed possible. It was during that time that I met David. Oh, David. He had a way of looking at you that made the rest of the world disappear. He was charming, knew exactly what to say. He sent me flowers at work, wrote poetry, and sang serenades under the moonlight. Can you believe that? It felt like something out of a movie. I was so in love that I could barely see anything else. At first everything was perfect, but over time, some things began to change. He started picking on my clothes, saying it was just because he wanted to protect me, that he knew what was best for me. Then he began to criticize my friends, saying they were no good for me, that they were harmful. I thought it was care, you know. I thought he just wanted what was best for me. The first time he raised his voice at me, I was in shock. He seemed so out of control that I thought, oh, he's just stressed. Work must be tough. But then the shouting got worse, and the words were so harsh it felt like they were stabbing me inside. And then one day, it wasn't just words anymore. You know what's most frightening? These things don't happen all at once. It's like poison that seeps in slowly until it suffocates you completely. He made me feel like I was the problem. He told me that no one else wanted me but him. He isolated me from everyone, even my own family. I started to believe he was all I had. I spent years living in fear. Fear of disappointing him, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of not surviving. He said that if I tried to leave, he would find me, and worse, that no one would believe me. Look, you who are listening to me now, maybe you know someone going through this. Don't underestimate what seems like just a jealous comment or control disguised as care. Those are the first signs, and if we don't notice, things only get worse. I'll tell you more about this, but first, promise me that if you or someone you know is living something like this, you won't ignore it. Pay attention, because we only see it when we're almost out of options. You know, every time I talk about this, it feels like part of that old weight comes back. But I need to tell you. I need to because maybe it will help someone. With David, the signs were there from the beginning, but I didn't see them. Or maybe I didn't want to see. I remember a day just before we got married, when we were at a cafe near our home. A waiter smiled at me. Nothing much, just being polite. But David didn't like it. After we left, he said something like, "You don't need to flirt with anyone." At the time, I laughed. I thought it was a joke. He even apologized later, saying it was just jealousy because he loved me so much. And I, foolishly, thought that was sweet. I thought it was a sign of love. Then came other things. He started to fix the way I dressed. "That skirt is too short, Maggie. You don't want others looking at you, do you?" Or, "Why wear makeup? You're naturally beautiful." It was all said in a way that seemed caring, but deep down it was control. The worst part was when he began to distance me from the people I loved. My childhood friends, they're envious, Maggie. They don't want what's best for us. My mother, she just wants to meddle in our lives, and little by little I drifted away. Not because I wanted to, but because he convinced me it was better that way. One day, my best friend Lisa tried to open my eyes. She told me, "Maggie, I don't like how he talks to you. This isn't love." I was furious with her. How could she not see the wonderful man David? And that's how my friendship with Lisa ended. Today, looking back, I see she just wanted to protect me. Things got worse after we got married. He began to control everything. What I did, where I went, even what I bought at the grocery store. If something was out of place or I did something he didn't like, the shouting would come. And the shouting turned into pushing. And after that, well, you can imagine what came. I felt trapped, like I was in a hole with no way out. I was afraid to ask for help, afraid that no one would believe me. He always said, "No one will listen to you, Maggie. Who would believe a woman like you?" And the worst part was that I believed him. Darling, you know what I learned from all? Fear is the greatest weapon an abuser has. They make you believe you're alone, that no one cares. But that's not true. It's never. I'll tell you how I began to realize all this and what happened. But I need you to promise me one thing. If you or someone you know is facing something similar, don't stay silent. You deserve more. We all deserve. Oh, darling, continuing this hurts, but it's also necessary. Because I know there are people who need to hear it. Remember when I told you about Lisa, my best friend? Even after I distanced myself from her, there were moments when I felt like calling. I wanted so much to tell her what was happening, but I felt ashamed. I thought, what if she says it's my fault? That I should have left sooner. So I stayed silent. One day everything changed. It was a night I'll never forget. David came home later than usual. I could tell he had been drinking. I could smell it from far away. He walked in with that look that made me freeze. "Why isn't dinner ready?" he asked. I tried to explain that I had been delayed at work, but before I could finish, he threw a plate against the wall. That sound, the shattering of porcelain, echoed in my head for that night. For the first time, he hit me hard. I fell to the floor, and I remember just lying there, not moving, holding back my tears. He left the room, mumbling something I couldn't even understand, and I stayed there, looking at the pieces of the broken plate. It was in that moment that something changed inside. The next morning, I looked in the mirror and could barely recognize myself. I had a cut on my lip. My face was swollen. But that's not what scared me. It was the emptiness in my eye. It was as if I was no longer the Maggie who dreamed of a happy life, who laughed loudly and made plans for the future. That's when I decided I needed to do something. But you know, it's not easy. Those who have never gone through it don't understand how hard it is to make that decision. I had no money saved, no one to trust. And the fear? Oh, the fear was with me all the time. Even so, I started to plan. It couldn't be impulsive, because if he found out, I knew I wouldn't survive. So I started with small things. I saved some change he gave me for groceries. I hid clothes in an old bag I kept at the back of the closet. And above all, I tried not to give any sign that something was happening. I knew I needed help, but where to? It wasn't like today, where there are shelters and hotlines for women. Back then, I didn't even know where to start. So I took a risk and went to a church in the neighborhood. The priest was a kind man, and after hearing my story, he said, "Maggie, you're not alone. We'll find a way out." And that's how, little by little, I began to chart my path to freedom. But darling, let me tell you, the hardest part wasn't the planning. It was dealing with the guilt. I thought about the vows I made at the altar, what people would say if they knew I was planning to escape. I'll tell you what happened next. How I ended up in a place where no one knew my name. How I rebuilt myself. But for now, I need you to understand one thing. No matter what the world says, no one deserves to live in fear. And no matter how dark the path seems, there is always a way. Darling, just remembering what happened next makes my heart race, even after all these years. At that time, the idea of running away seemed crazy. But it was the only choice I had. After that conversation with the priest, I started to gather the pieces of my plan. He connected me with a woman named Dorothy, who worked at a shelter for women at risk. This shelter was in another city, far enough away that David wouldn't easily find me. The challenge was getting out of the house without him noticing. David had eyes everywhere, always suspicious. I knew that if he found my hidden bag or discovered I was talking to someone, it would be the end. So, every step had to be carefully planned. I remember a specific. I was sitting in the kitchen, watching the clock because I knew. It was dark, and fear accompanied me at every corner. When I finally spotted the car, I felt such a huge relief that I almost collapsed. Dorothy was there, with a gentle smile, and the driver helped me get in. "You're safe now," she said. But at that moment, I still couldn't believe it. Part of me thought David would show up at any moment, that he would discover where I was and bring me back. In the shelter, there were other women, each with their own story of pain. Some had small children, others were alone like me. But despite everything, there was a sense of hope that maybe life could be different. It was there that I began to understand what freedom meant. I won't lie, It wasn't easy. In the first few days, I still woke up scared, thinking I was back home with David. But slowly, I started to rebuild my strength with the help of the incredible people I met. Dear one, escaping was just the beginning. I'm going to tell you how it was to start over, create a new identity, and try to find peace after everything. But first, I want you to know, even in the most desperate situations, there's always a chance to begin anew. Sometimes, all we need is someone to say, "I believe in you." Dear one, starting a new life wasn't what I imagined. I thought that leaving that house meant the worst was behind me, but I discovered that freedom also brings its own challenges. In the shelter, the women shared their stories, and it was impossible not to be moved. Some had been through things even worse than I had. Others were there with children in their arms, trying to protect them at all costs. I saw the reflection of my own pain in their eyes, but also something more: courage. A courage I didn't even know existed within me. Dorothy, the woman who helped me escape, became a sort of guardian angel. She explained that the shelter was temporary, that I would need to find a place to start over. That's when the hardest part came, changing my identity. I never thought I would one day have to abandon my own name. But it was necessary, you see. I knew that if David found out where I was, he wouldn't rest until he found me. So, Maggie had to disappear. I started calling myself Sarah. Sarah Johnson. A common name, easy to go unnoticed. Dorothy helped me get new documents, and even a simple job as a cashier in a diner. At first, I felt a knot in my stomach every time someone walked in the door. I always thought it would be him, that he would find me. But over time, I began to realize he didn't have as much power over me as I thought. You know what was most painful? Leaving behind the few connections I still had. My mother, my friends. I couldn't reach out to anyone. It was as if I had died to the world. One day, sitting in the small apartment I managed to rent, I cried like I had never cried before. It was a mourning, you know. Mourning for the life I had lost, for the people I loved, for the future I had imagined that would never come. But something began to change within. With each passing day, I felt like I was rediscovering myself. Gradually, I started to make new friendships. People who didn't know who I was before, who only knew me as Sarah. It wasn't easy to trust again, but I realized that if I didn't let my guard down, I would never truly live. There was a moment that marked my new life. It was when I received my first paycheck from the diner. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I took that money and bought a small vase with yellow flowers. I placed it on the kitchen table, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile. It was a sign, to myself, that life was beginning to bloom again. But you know what else helped me? Talking. Opening my heart to women who had lived the same. It wasn't easy to remember, but every time I shared my story, it felt like I was lifting a little of the weight I carried. I'll tell you more, dear one. Because starting over wasn't just about work and friendships. It was also about finding hope again. About believing that I deserved to be happy. But for now, I want you to carry this with you. We can lose almost everything, but we never lose the ability to start over. Just one step at a time. Dear one, the next steps were the most challenging, but also the most significant. Each day I learned a little more about who I was without the constant fear. It was like rediscovering a part of myself that I thought had disappeared forever. One day, while working at the diner, something unexpected happened. A customer left a book on the table where they had been sitting. When I went to clean up, I saw the title, 100 Years of Solitude. I don't know why it caught my attention so much, but I decided to open it and read a passage. It was as if the words in that book spoke directly to me. It was a story full of pain, loss, and new beginnings, and it made me feel like I wasn't so alone after all. From that day on, I started visiting the public library. It was there that I rediscovered the joy of reading, something that David had taken from me. He always said it was a waste of time, that there were more useful things for me to do. But now, with each page I read, I felt my mind and soul freeing a little more. Over time, I started writing too. They weren't grand texts, just thoughts, memories, and dreams I had never had the courage to put on paper. It was therapeutic. It was as if each word written helped to heal the invisible wounds I carried. Then, something incredible happened. Dorothy, my guardian angel, invited me to speak in a support group. It was a small circle of women who, like me, had survived abusive relationships. At first, I hesitated. Who was I to speak? But she insisted. Your story could be the strength someone else needs. That night, I sat in a simple chair, surrounded by faces that bore marks of pain, but also of resilience. When I began to tell my story, my voice trembled. But as the words flowed, something changed. I saw in their eyes the same pain I had felt, but I also saw hope. After the meeting, a young woman named Claire approached me. She held her hands tightly, as if trying to contain her nerves. "Thank you for sharing," she said. "I thought I was alone, but hearing you made me believe I can get out of this too." It was then that I realized my pain had a purpose. Every tear, every sleepless night, all of it could be transformed into something greater, helping other women find the freedom I had finally found. Since then, my life gained a new meaning. I began volunteering at the shelter where I had stayed. Gradually, I became a sort of mentor for women who arrived as scared as I had once been. Dear one, the road to this point hasn't been easy, and there are still days when memories haunt me. But you know what I've learned? We are not defined by what we have suffered, but by what we choose to do with it. Today, when I look back, I no longer feel that emptiness. I feel gratitude for having escaped, for having found people like Dorothy, and for being part of the journey of other women. I'll tell you more about how life continued, but for now, I want you to know, never underestimate the strength you have inside. Even in the darkest moments, that strength is there, waiting to guide you to the light. Oh, dear one, let me tell you about that moment when I realized my life had truly changed. It was something simple, but it touched me deeply. I was in the kitchen of the shelter, helping to prepare dinner for the women who had just arrived. One of them, Claire, remember I told you about her, called me over to talk. She had been there for a few days, still scared, but starting to believe she could start over. "Sarah," she said, "using my new name, how did you manage to forgive? Not him, but yourself." I keep blaming myself, thinking I was weak, that I should have left sooner. When she asked me that, I felt a pang in my heart, because, for a long time, I had asked myself the same thing. For years, I carried that guilt like a heavy suitcase full of stones. But in that moment, I realized something had changed. I took a deep breath and said, "Claire, it takes time, but you know what I've learned? The guilt isn't ours. No one chooses to be treated like that. The blame lies with the people who made us believe we deserved less than we are. The true strength lies in getting back up, even after everything. And you've already taken that step." She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but there was something different in her gaze, maybe hope. And in that instant, I realized that by helping other women, I was also healing myself. After that, I made an important decision. With the help of Dorothy and the shelter staff, I decided to return to school. I began taking small online courses and eventually enrolled in a community college. I decided I wanted to specialize in social work to help women in situations like the one I had lived through. It was a huge challenge. I wasn't young anymore, and the fear of failure was still there. After finishing my studies, I got a job at a support center. There, I helped women find resources, plan safe exits, and most importantly, believe that a better life was waiting for them. And you know, something curious happened. One day, while I was at the center, I received a call. It was from an unknown number. When I answered, a familiar voice greeted me. It was Lisa, my best friend from years ago, the one I mentioned at the beginning. "I couldn't believe it when I heard your name," she said, emotional. "I thought I'd never find you again." Oh dear. Reuniting with Lisa was one of the most beautiful moments of my life. We cried, laughed, and shared everything that had happened since we drifted apart. She told me she had tried to find me, but no one knew where I was. When I shared my experiences, she simply held my hand and said, "You are the bravest woman I know." After so long, I felt that Maggie, the old me, and Sarah, the woman I had become, were finally at peace with each other. I'll tell you more about how my life progressed, But I want you to know this. The past never stops being part of us, but it doesn't define who we are. What defines us is what we choose to do with it. And I chose to bloom, even after everything. You can too, my dear. That reunion with Lisa brought me a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. It was as if after years of living in pieces, someone had found a lost fragment of who I was and helped me put it back together. Over time, Lisa and I became inseparable again, just like we used to be. She became my bridge to revisit the past, but in a safe way, without fear. Talking to her helped me realize that I could look at my story without being swallowed by it. One day, Lisa invited me to her daughter's wedding. I hesitated. Going out in public, to a place where I might be recognized, still scared me. But Lisa insisted. You need this, Sarah. You need to remember that the world is bigger than the shadows of your past. She was right. I went to the wedding, still nervous, but determined to face this challenge. And, dear, it was one of the most liberating experiences of my life. Sitting there, seeing the happiness on Lisa's daughter's face, I realized something I had never allowed myself to feel before. I also deserved moments like that. After the wedding, Lisa and I stayed up talking late into the night. It was then that she suggested something that would change my life again. Sarah, have you ever thought about writing your story? My first reaction was to laugh. Right? Who would want to read about that, Lisa? But she insisted. Your story isn't just about pain. It's about overcoming, about hope. There are so many people who need to hear this. And so I began to write. It wasn't easy. There were days when I had to stop because the memories were too intense. But at the same time, it was as if every word on the page was a way to free myself. The manuscript took months to complete, and when I finished, Lisa helped me find a local publisher interested in the story. I didn't expect much, but to my surprise, they loved it. Within a few months, my book was on the shelves. Do you know what was the most exciting part? Seeing other women read my story and tell me it inspired. One of them wrote me a letter saying, "Your book gave me the courage to leave an abusive relationship. Thank you for sharing your truth." Dear, that moment showed me that sometimes what we think is the lowest point in our life can actually be the beginning of something much greater. Today, I continue working at the support center, helping women find their own strength. But I also travel to give talks, share my story, and show that no matter how difficult it is, there is always a chance to start over. I still have my yellow flowers in the kitchen. They are a constant reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, we can bloom. I'll tell you more about some of the incredible women I met along the way, because they also have stories of courage that need to be heard. But for now, I want you to remember one thing. Starting over is not the end of the pain, but the beginning of healing. And you deserve that healing. Always. Oh dear. Let me tell you about a woman who deeply marked my journey. Her name is Amanda. She showed up at the support center on a rainy night, with a lost look and holding only a small suitcase. Amanda was young, just over 20, but she seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. When we sat down to talk, she shared her story. The abusive relationship had started so subtly that she hadn't even noticed. First, it was excessive jealousy, then constant criticism, until one day, the violence began. The cycle was always the same. He would apologize, promise to change, and she would believe him. But things only got worse. The turning point came when Amanda realized she was afraid to go home. She told me. I would stand at the door, taking deep breaths, trying to guess what mood he would be. It was like walking on eggshells all the time. My dear, hearing that broke my heart, because I knew exactly how she felt. I had been in that same place, feeling that same paralyzing fear. Amanda stayed at the shelter for weeks, trying to regain her strength. But she had something that she didn't even know she possessed. Incredible determination. We started planning for her future. We talked about courses she could take, how to get a job, and rebuild her life. I remember one day in particular. Amanda walked into the shelter holding a notebook. She had started writing down her goal. "I want to go back to school. I want to be a teacher someday," she said, with tears in her eyes but filled with hope. I helped Amanda enroll in a community program that offered scholarships. It was exhilarating to see her take that first step. A few months later, she got a job as an assistant at a local school, and you should have seen the sparkle in her eyes when she told me the news. Amanda became a symbol of hope for so many women at the shelter. She proved that with support and determination, it was possible to turn pain into strength. A year later, she returned to the support center, but this time for a special reason. Amanda came to share her story with other women. She wanted to show that it was possible to overcome. When she stepped onto the small stage and began to speak, everyone in the room fell silent. Her words touched every heart. Dear, stories like Amanda's make me believe that the work we do is not in vain. Every woman who finds her strength and starts over is a victory. But you know, these women also taught me something important. We never stop growing, learning, and healing. Even after everything I went through, they continue to inspire me to be a better version of myself. I still have so much to tell you about other incredible people who crossed my path, and how, together, we discovered that even in the worst storms, there is always a rainbow waiting to us. But for now, I want you to keep this in your heart. You are stronger than you think, and you are never alone. Oh dear, there's more. I can't leave out the story of Carolina, a woman who came to the shelter when she was already 8 months pregnant. She arrived with such a closed-off, exhausted expression that it broke my heart. It wasn't just her body that carried the weight of violence, but also the fear for the baby about to be born. Carolina had a timid smile, and at first, she didn't want to talk much about her situation. She only said she was there because she had nowhere else to. As I got to know her better, I discovered that she was with a man who treated her like property, someone who controlled even what she ate, where she went, and whom she spoke to. Her pregnancy was what made her awaken. I can't let him grow up thinking this is normal, she told me, with tears in her eyes. I knew exactly what she was talking about. The fear of perpetuating a cycle of violence is something many women feel, especially when children are involved. Carolina stayed at the shelter, but her fear only grew as the due date approached. I accompanied her to medical appointments, tried to support her, and sometimes just sat in silence with her so she wouldn't feel so alone. During one of those appointments, she looked at me and said, "You know, Sarah, I always thought I had to endure this, that my fate was sealed, but you made me believe I don't have that. I can be more than this." Dear, hearing those words gave me strengths I didn't even know I had. Carolina was discovering her power, and it made me think that perhaps the greatest victory a woman can have is believing in her own worth, no matter what the world has tried to do to her. The day of her delivery came, and everything went well. Carolina had a healthy baby boy, whom she named João. When I saw her holding the baby for the first time, it was as if she had been reborn. That smile that was once hidden opened up in such a genuine way that I felt warmth in my chest. She was now determined to rebuild her life. A few months later, she was moving to a new apartment in a quieter neighborhood, embracing a fresh start for herself and João. "I can't live in fear anymore, Sarah," she said. "I deserve more. He deserves more." It was in that moment I realized something profound. True strength doesn't just come from escaping, but from starting anew. From taking control of one's life and choosing a new path, no matter how challenging it may be. Carolina demonstrated this with every step she took. Oh, and I can't help but tell you how she became an inspiration for other women in similar situations. With her calm demeanor and steady gaze, she became a kind of guide for those beginning their journey to freedom. Every now and then, she sends me messages about João's progress and her new life, and I get emotional every time. Dear, Carolina's story, like that of so many other women, is proof that when we allow ourselves to believe in our potential, the impossible becomes possible. These women have taught me so much, and they continue to do so. I go on with my life, now filled with purpose. My work at the support center, the talks, the book, the help I keep offering, what fills me with gratitude the most, is knowing that even in the hardest moments, there's always a chance to start over. And that's what I want to leave you with. Never give up on yourself. The journey may be long, but the victory, my dear, lies in every step we take forward. Each step brings us closer to a life worth living. Dear, I never thought my story could make such a difference. Sometimes, when we're in the eye of the storm, it's hard to imagine that one day we'll look back and see that everything we went through was not in vain. But over time, I began to realize that my pain had a purpose and, not just my pain, but the pain of all the women I encountered along the way. I remember one particular event, a support meeting for women survivors of abuse. The room was filled with familiar faces, but also many strangers, each with their own baggage, their own stories of struggle. On stage, I stood there, facing so many women, sharing my experience and my voice, and in that moment, I realized I was no longer just speaking for myself. I was representing all those who had been silenced, who never had the chance to share their stories, or who, out of fear, could not. Next to me was Amanda, who is now one of the group leaders, and Carolina, who now works as a counselor at a women's support center. They were there with me, and somehow we all felt stronger together. It was at that meeting that I understood the power of our voices, not just because people were listening to us, but because women were beginning to realize that, yes, they too could rise. They could. Their lives weren't lost, nor defined by a story of pain they didn't choose but had lived through. With each story we shared, a new window of hope opened. You know, dear, I am no longer the woman I once was, afraid to live, afraid to be who I truly am. I am a woman who found her purpose in helping others find theirs. It's funny to think that all along I believed I needed a grand change to be happy. But what I really needed was to accept who I am and embrace my journey, with all its scars and imperfections. Now, looking back, I see how blessed I was by everyone who crossed my path. Dorothy, who gave me strength when I needed it most. Lisa, who taught me to laugh again. Amanda and Carolina, who showed me that starting over is not only possible, but necessary. Today, I continue living with my purpose crystal clear. My work at the support center, the talks, the courses I now offer on overcoming challenges and self-discover, all of this reflects what I have learned over the years. I spent a long time asking why this happened to me, why I had to suffer so much. But gradually, I began to understand that it wasn't about the suffering itself, but about what I would do with it. I chose to transform that pain into something that could help others not lose their way. I could tell you more stories, more women, more moments of overcoming and starting anew. But for now, I want you to hold on to this. Your life, no matter how difficult it has been so far, still has more chapters to write. And believe me, the best is yet to come. Starting over is possible at any moment because the strength to change is already within you. Sometimes, we just need someone to remind us of that. So, my dear, if you are going through a moment of pain or uncertainty, know that you are not alone. I have been where you are, and today I am here, showing that tomorrow can be as beautiful as you allow it to be. Don't give up, because as I have learned, there is always a chance to start anew, and life, after all, is a journey of choices, and you have the power to choose a better future. Dear, throughout this journey, I've realized that when we are trapped in fear and pain, we tend to forget what we are capable of. I was like that. I thought that because of everything I went through, I wouldn't have the strength to change. I believed that my story of pain defined me forever. But the truth is, in a way, that suffering strengthened me. It prepared me to help others, like you. And this is exactly what I want to talk to you about now. It's not about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about being true to yourself, accepting your flaws and fears, but most importantly, having the courage to move forward, even when it seems impossible. I remember one day when I was giving a talk on overcoming challenges, and a woman approached me afterward. She was in shock, almost speechless. When she finally found her voice, she said, "I was thinking of giving up. I thought I had lost everything, that there was no hope left for me." She looked into my eyes and her words echoed what I'd once felt. But hearing your story made me realize I can start over. Dear, it was at that moment that I truly understood the impact our stories can have. It's not about being extraordinary or having done something grand. It's about being vulnerable, being honest about our pain, and most importantly, being able to share what we've learned. Because in the end, we're all just trying to find a way to move forward. And it's our connection, our humanity, that gives us strength. I also remember a time when I had to face a place I feared, the courtroom. My abuser was still out there, and he was called to answer for his actions. During the trial, I froze for a moment, feeling that old fear rushing back. But remembering everything I had overcome, I felt a strength rising from within. I was there not only to seek justice, but to show myself that I was no longer the fragile woman I once was. I was someone who had survived, who had rebuilt her life, and who would not let that chapter define who I am. The judicial process was long and difficult, and the challenges didn't stop there. But you know what happened? When the verdict came down and he was convicted, it was one of the most liberating moments of my life. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I was finally telling that painful past it had no power over me anymore. And more importantly, I was telling myself that I am capable of victory. Dear, life is not easy. Sometimes it challenges us in ways we never imagined. But what matters is how we choose to deal with those challenges. Life will continue to bring tough moments, but I've learned that when you know who you are and what you deserve, nothing can bring you down. And I want you to know this. You deserve more love, more respect, more happiness. No matter what has happened so far, what matters is that you have the power to decide what comes next. Don't let anything or anyone tell you otherwise. I'm here to remind you of that whenever you need it. No matter how arduous the path may seem, you have everything within you to move forward and create the life you deserve. And when you look back, you'll realize that even in the darkest moments, you were stronger than you ever imagined. Because as I always say, starting over is not the end of the pain, it's the beginning of healing. And you are on the right path. You know, dear, when we start walking toward healing, it's not a straight line. We think we'll wake up one day, and suddenly all the wounds will be healed, that the pain will dissipate like mist in the sun. But no, the healing process is more like a road filled with ups and downs, with some unexpected turns. And sometimes you might feel like you're going backward, but it's just a temporary detour. Healing is not a destination. It's a continuous journey. That's how it was for me. I had days when the longing for my old life almost paralyzed me. It's funny because that old life was a life of pain and fear, but even so, there was something about it that gave me a sense of familiarity. When the new felt scary, the old, no matter how painful, felt safer. But what I learned over time is that this safety was false. Fear, control, and pain were never meant to be my destiny. I was made for something greater, and so are you. I remember one afternoon, after I had started my work with other women, I went to a park alone. I needed a moment of quiet to reflect on how much my life had changed, on how much I still had to learn. And it was in that moment, sitting on those cold stones, that I realized I was already free. Not only from my abuser, but from the internal shackles that prevented me from seeing myself as I truly am. A strong, capable woman with so much love to give. I was no longer a prisoner of my past. My story no longer defined me. I was more than the experiences I had lived through. I was a woman rebuilt. And as I looked toward the future, I saw an energy and a light within me that I had never imagined I could possess. And you know what else? I realized my journey was not just about escaping. It was about creating a new version of myself, creating new dreams, creating a future where I would be the author of my own story, where I could write each chapter with the ink of courage and hope. Sometimes it's hard to see that we have that strength within us. But my dear, I can assure you, it's there. Perhaps it's dormant, perhaps hidden behind tears and fear, but it is there. And when you discover it, when you finally understand that you can rise again, nothing will hold you back. Now, when someone asks me how I managed to get through all of that, the answer isn't simple, but it is true. I never did it alone. I had people by my side, women who also fought, who also fell and got back up. No matter how lonely the journey may feel, you are never truly alone. The hands we extend to one another, the gestures of kindness and support, are the pillars that help us rise when our strength falters. And gradually, we start to see that by helping others, we also help ourselves. Because in the end, we are all human, all in search of the same thing, to be seen, heard, and loved for who we really are. And you, my dear, are on that path too. Every step you take is a step toward freedom, toward peace, toward happiness. It doesn't matter where you are right now, or what has happened up to this point. What matters is that you choose to move forward. And with each new day, you get closer and closer to a future where you are the master of your own destiny, where you can create the life you deserve. If you ever feel lost, remember me, my story, and the stories of the many women who, just like you, were once in a place of pain and fear, and are now living a life filled with purpose and strength. Because, my dear, the story doesn't end here. Your story is just beginning, and it will be wonderful. Dear, you know, there's one thing I've learnt over the years, that time, no matter how slowly it seems to drag during moments of pain, has a way of healing. Of course, it doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't make the pain disappear instantly. But it gives us perspective. It allows us to look back and see how much we've grown. I look at the woman I was before all of this, and I can hardly recognize that being so full of fear and with every step I took, every battle I faced, every night I thought I wouldn't be able to go on, a new version of myself was being born. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but over time, I began to find the lost pieces of myself. I finally looked in the mirror and saw not just the woman who escaped pain, but the woman who found the courage to rebuild herself. And you can too. It may not seem like it now, and perhaps doubt still knocks at your heart's door. But the truth is, you are stronger than any fear or shadow from your past. Sometimes life challenges us in ways we never imagined. But it's in those moments that our true strength comes to the surface. And the most beautiful thing is that, even in the darkest nights, we have within us the light to move forward. It's not a light that shines all the time, but it's a light that guides us, even when we're in the dark. I remember one day when I started to feel that everything was truly changing. It was a winter morning, the kind of day when the air feels fresh and clean. I was heading to a meeting, something that would have made me nervous before, afraid that I wouldn't be capable, that I wouldn't measure up to the situation. But on that day I felt different. I was no longer the woman who hid behind fear and insecurity. I was there because I knew I had something valuable to offer, something only I could share. My experience, my truth, my courage. When I entered the room, the energy was palpable. There was a group of women there, all with their stories of pain, all with something to say. And it was in that moment that I realized something wonderful. The stories of overcoming that we share are not just to give hope to others, but also to remind ourselves of who we are. Every word, every gesture of support was like a reminder that together we are unbeatable. And in that instant, I realized that what I was living was not just about. It was about all the women who silently fight, about all the lives that can be touched by an act of courage, by a word of support. I then saw that I had found my true purpose, to be a source of light for other women, to be that beacon that, one day, someone looked at and saw that they could. I won't lie, dear. The road isn't easy, and you will face difficult days. You will feel that the weight of your story is heavier than you can bear. But remember this, the scars we carry do not define. They are proof of our survival, of our power. And each time you rise again, you will be stronger, wiser, and more capable of taking the next step. I know you have within you everything you need to move forward. You have the strength to rewrite your story, to turn pain into fuel for your future. Every small act of love you give yourself, every moment when you allow yourself to believe that you can be happy again, is one step closer to your rebirth. And please, always remember this whenever you doubt yourself. You are not alone. I have been where you are. Many other women have gone through what you are experiencing. And today, we are all here to remind you that your life is precious, that you deserve to be happy, and that you have the ability to do everything your heart desires. And, above all, remember, your future is a blank canvas, waiting to be filled with the beauty you choose to create. And, contrary to what you might think, the best is yet to come. Dear, maybe you still feel that the path ahead is foggy. Maybe you still wonder if you will ever find true peace. I understand that feeling because I have been through it. But looking back now, I see that every step, no matter how small, was leading me to something. Even in moments of despair, when it felt like life was crushing me, each of those moments was, in fact, an opportunity for growth. Life has this curious way of teaching us, even when we are not ready to learn. For a long time, I fought against the idea that I could be happy again, as if, somehow, my pain was it. I thought that what I had lived had robbed me of the ability to dream, to trust again. But what I didn't know was that happiness doesn't depend on what happened, but on how we choose to live from here on out. I had to learn to let go, to forgive myself, and more importantly, to allow myself to be happy. There was a time, shortly after I began my work with other women, that I received a letter from a young woman who had been in an abusive relationship. She wrote to me saying that after hearing me speak, she finally found the courage to leave her situation. The letter didn't just say thank you. It spoke of something deeper. It spoke about the power of hope, about the possibility of creating a new path. I kept that letter like a treasure, because, in that moment, I realized that my mission was already fulfilled. No, I hadn't saved the world, but I had helped one person, one woman, to rise and believe that she deserved. And somehow, that made me understand the impact our stories can have. Sometimes, we don't even know how we are touching someone's life. Sometimes we just need to be honest, courageous, and the people around us will find strength in our truth. And that's what I want you to remember, my dear. When you feel lonely, when fear threatens to paralyze you, remember that your story has the power to inspire. It has the power to change not only your life, but the lives of many others. The pain you carry, no matter how hard it is just a part of the whole. And what you do with that pain is what will define who you become. The rebirth is real, and it is possible for all of us. I know that when we are in the midst of a storm, it is hard to believe that things can get better. But I am here, on the other side, to tell you with all certainty, they can and will get. Time will help heal your wounds. But more than that, you will learn to live in a new way. You will learn to give yourself permission to be happy again, to create new dreams, and to pursue each one of them with courage. Don't be afraid of the future. The future. And when that happens, I want you to remember me, and all the women who stood up, all the ones who moved forward despite everything. Our journey is never solitary, because we, women, are stronger when we stand together. What you've lived through doesn't define you, but what you choose to be from this point forward does. That is what makes you stronger, more beautiful, and more free. And I will always be here to remind you of that. You are not alone. Your future is waiting, and it is brighter than you can imagine. And you know, dear, as you start to recognize that strength within you, you will also see that it's not just about you. Your journey, what you are experiencing and achieving now, can serve as inspiration for so many other women who are hiding in the shadows, feeling alone and hopeless. Sometimes, all someone needs is to see an example of courage, a sign that change is possible, even when everything seems to be against us. I remember a moment that changed my perspective on all of this. I was at a cafe, alone, after a talk about abuse and recovery. A woman approached me, hesitant, almost as if she were afraid to be seen. She sat at the table next to mine and, with a shy smile, began to chat. It was a simple conversation, but gradually, she told me about her struggles, the years she spent trying to find a way out, but mostly about how she no longer knew who to trust. I looked into her eyes and said something that at the time felt so simple. You are stronger than you think, and even if the road seems long, you have everything you need to move forward. And in that moment, I saw something wonderful in her eyes, a spark of hope. She was no longer lost, no longer alone. She knew she could keep going. And it wasn't just the conversation that helped her. It was, in part, my own story, my own recovery, that served as a mirror for her. So, my dear, never underestimate the power of your story. Never think that what you've lived through, or are still living, has no value. Your truth has a far greater impact than you might realize. And even if you cannot see the grandeur of your own healing process right now, you are doing something incredible. You are rising, one step at a time, and inspiring others to do the same. Always remember that the future you are creating now will be a source of strength for others. There will be moments when you feel tired, when the weight of the journey seems heavier than you can bear. But please, never forget that with each day you choose to move forward, you are proving to yourself that pain does not have power over you. You are in control. You have the ability to shape your destiny, and you deserve all the joys that life has to offer. You know, dear, time will pass, and the winds of life will change. Perhaps you will never fully erase the scars of the past, but one day you will look at them and see that they are no longer sources of pain. They will merely be reminders of your strength, your courage, and how you overcame the impossible. And when that happens, you will know that every second of struggle was worth it, because what lies ahead is infinitely more beautiful than anything that has been left behind. So keep walking. Sometimes you will stumble. Sometimes you will fall. But always, always get back up. Because in the end, who you become after all this will be the most incredible and inspiring person. And the woman you are creating will be the one that others, just like you, will look to and find inspiration to take the next step and discover their own strength. You will never know how strong you are until being strong is your only option. And, my dear, I can assure you that you have that strength. I know. I have seen women like you rise again, and believe me, your story will be one of the most powerful of. Dear, the journey I have shared with you is just one of many stories of overcoming and courage. Each of these women, just like me, has proven that even in the face of the cruelest adversities, there is always a chance to start anew. And if there's one thing I've learned along the way, it's that our strength lies in unity, in mutual support, and in the certainty that we are never alone. If you identified with this story, or if you know someone who might find inspiration in it, please leave your comment below. I would love to hear your thoughts, and who knows, your message may be just what someone else needs to hear. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this, filled with resilience, hope, and of course the assurance that we can always bloom again, even after the storm.